He's a serial entrepreneur who's done almost everything in the world of media and entertainment.
The most interesting man in the world.
Let's welcome Jaeson Ma.
Jaeson Ma.
My name is Jaeson Ma. I'm a serial entrepreneur.
That's great research. I haven't told this one part of the story. It's kind of wild. I recently just helped produce this Kanye show in Korea, and I just love being around Kanye because Ye's just Ye. We were at YouTube when those 5 people, he was like, Jaeson, tonight there's a company called YouTube. They're uploading content to servers. Every single major tech startup that rules your phone today with apps, we were there.
You were the top 500 business entertainment leaders in the world. That puts you at the forefront of Hollywood. That puts you in the forefront of global media.
I always just had this chip on my shoulder that I had to take care of the family, had to take care of my mother, my sisters, and just make sure that the rent was paid. I just got caught grand theft, 6 figures worth of Armani and Valentino suits. How the F am I gonna get out of this? I walked out without a record, without a conviction, without having to go to jail. It just never happens the way you think it's gonna happen. But if you really have intention and you see God in everything, nothing's by accident. And that's where MC Hammer comes into my life, because God didn't create us to lose, He created us to win.
Morning, Jaeson.
Good morning, Elson.
Thank you for coming on the show. This is an interesting episode. You have an amazing story. This has been documented in many, many ways and form. I was sharing with you earlier, this needs to be a 10-hour episode. I'm going to try my best to keep it in an hour. Firstly, many people in our side of the world may not know you, but all of us have you to thank for in terms of all this Asian, Eastern representation in Hollywood, in global media, and I want to dive into all of that. I want to start with a question for you. For those people who are closest to Jaeson, how do you think that they would describe Jaeson?
Man, you just came straight for it. All right, let's
for it.
go. How would they describe me? Man, I'd have to ask them. I think people know that I'm passionate. Whatever I do it with 110%. So that's always, I think, something that describes a bit of my personality and my heart. I put my heart into everything. And so I think I wear my heart on my sleeves. I think there was one word to describe who I am and what I do. It's just built and inspired by passion. And I always define passion as if you're passionate about something, you're willing to suffer for it. And if you're passionate about something, it's something that you are willing to die for, or something you believe in, right? And so I feel like for most people, it's actually hard to find passion, something that really motivates you every day, that what you're doing is actually your calling, right? Or your purpose. Now, I've heard it before from a very well-known teacher. His name is Dr. Miles Monroe, but he says that your job is your job is what you do 9 to 5 to pay the bills, but your work is your calling. So I think there's a very specific difference between your job and your work, right? I think someone that has a job doesn't want to be there. they not say they don't want to be there, but most of the time it's just a paycheck, right? It's like whether you're an investment banker or whether you're a dentist or whether you're an engineer, whether you're a janitor, right? Or whether you're in marketing. Jobs can come and jobs can go. You can always get a better job, pays the bills, turns the lights on. But when you find your work, that's your purpose, right? That's your calling. I think Warren Buffett loves his work and he'll never retire. He obviously can retire a million bazillion times over. He's one of the wealthiest men in the world, but I think he was born to invest, right? That's his work. That's his calling, right? And you'll never retire from your work, right? So I feel like for me, my passion has always been about bridging East and West through media, entertainment, and technology, through stories and talent. So whatever I've touched or whatever I've done, it stays within that mission statement, and that's that's my work.
Yep. I think the word passion, calling will come up into it in the next 1 hour, but this might be the broadest episode that we talked about. We're gonna touch a bit about calling in terms of a higher form. We might go into a bit of like exorcism, maybe a little bit of early rapping album days, working with Bruno Mars, now discovering new Asian talent. Like this is gonna be super, super broad and deep at the same time. Want to bring it back to early days of Jaeson. I read that you grew up in a single mom household, youngest of 3. Early days wasn't really putting you in a head start position. I think quite a rough start, right? Do you recall how it was like, growing up when you were 10, 11, 12 years old?
Yeah, I think your childhood environment definitely defines who you are and what you become. I forgot, I saw some Instagram quote. It's like, great men started nations, but then like they had it hard, right? But then their children, right, didn't have to go through that hardship. So it creates weaker men, right? And so I do believe that struggle, challenges, hardship, environments that are not easy make you stronger, right? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But I really do thank God for having a rough upbringing. It wasn't like I was in the hood, you know what I'm saying? Like, but it wasn't Beverly Hills either, you know what I'm saying? It was just very lower middle class, suburban neighborhood. I grew up mainly with Southeast Asian gangs, mainly Vietnamese, Cambodian, Laos, and, also Latino, Mexican. So I kind of just grew up in East San Jose, where I was born in Texas, but I was raised in East San Jose. And there's just a lot of trouble going on all the time. And growing up with a single mom where you didn't know if she was going to pay the rent the next month. My mom did daycare, so she literally had to take care of, most of the time, like Silicon Valley engineers' kids that would come and drop off at my house, and I would have like a baby crib in my room, my sister's room, my other sister's room, my mom's room, and in the living room be like the playground where all the kids are watching sing-along songs and Disney movies, and I'd like wipe their ass. I'd have to sing songs and watch, Little Mermaid with them, but it was a blessing. Like these kids were just, it was amazing. But just seeing my mom, having to do that since I was in 5th grade, probably, I think 4th, 5th grade, until I was probably early 20s, when I was able to finally start working, and I could actually retire my mom and make a living and pay the bills for her. But just seeing my mom struggle as a single mom in America, where she could barely speak English and didn't have any support or any network, away from Hong Kong, and just seeing her struggle every day, that was, as a young man, and not having a father in the house. My parents were divorced, right? My dad was in and out. He was a businessman, interesting dude, but actually more interesting than me. Seriously, he's an interesting guy. It just definitely made me, having a mother and 2 older sisters, and being the youngest and being the only man in the house, a young man in the house. I always just had this chip on my shoulder that I had to take care of the family, had to take care of my mother, my sisters, and just make sure that, the rent was paid. So I was just hustling since I was like 12, right? I was like literally selling candy bars since I was like 12, 13. It was that's a whole nother crazy story. It was just like, however I can make money, I'm just gonna make money. And I still remember, I think I was 13. I was in 6th grade. I still remember this. Sierramont Middle School. Shout out to anybody in the 408. This white dude pulled up in this white like van, like where they like abduct children and like send them into like sex trafficking. It was like that type of vibe. He would pull up and he opened the door, and it was just a bunch of us kids standing in front of our middle school waiting to get picked up or take the bus. And he's like, "Hey man, you kids want to make some money?" I'm like, doing what? He's like, selling candy bars. I was like, let's go. So I like jumped in the van, and I kid you not, it was like 4 or 5 of my other friends were all just like, we could have just literally went over the border to Mexico and never came back, right? And literally this dude, I still remember, this random white dude, and we would have, you know, these plastic buckets of like Snickers and like Almond Joy and like Reese's Pieces, and we would sell them for $5 cash. And he gave us this make-believe script. We'd had to make people feel pity for us that we were from the hood and we're like ghetto children that can't eat, right? But it was called Youth in Action. And I still remember the script. It was like, hi, my name's Jason. I'm from Youth in Action. I'm trying to, you know, earn money to go to Disneyland this summer for the first time because I can't afford it. But if you can help me, this is going to help kids like me stay off the streets. And so we would just like go up to people at gas stations, like knock on doors in the middle of the hood, right? I remember one time I went in some crazy neighborhood and there's this Vietnam vet, and this dude came out with a shotgun when I was trying to sell him candy. I still remember very clearly. It was like screen door. It was like a hot summer day, and then he was watching like a war black and white movie. I'm like, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. All of a sudden, I just hear, "You fucking goat, you chink, you little nip." He pulls out a gun. I'm like, yo, bro.
I'm just selling candies, man.
I'm trying to sell candies, man. I'm trying to go to Disneyland. Oh, man. But, yo, so I was like the top seller. That's how I learned my sales skills. And that's why I'm saying your environment. Like, I had to learn at 13 to just not be afraid to talk to anybody, right? Literally walk up to anyone and sell them a candy bar for $5. And so I remember I was consistently selling at least 4 to 5 candy bars per run. Like it would be like a 2-hour, 4-hour run. And then he would always pay us in $1 bills, right? Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, he would take us to Golfland, which was like miniature golf where we play arcades and Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat. And I come in and he just gives me like a stack of 21s, right? And I'd be like, yo, what's good? I'm about to make it rain. So that was me. I was like 12, 13 years old. And then, my pockets are full of $1 bills. I was probably making like, $50, $100 a week, right? Yeah. But, I didn't have to, burden my mom for that, right? And paid for my video games and paid for my Nikes.
I didn't hear about this story, but this just adds to the book. There's so many stories that I picked up, and I really tried to condense into 1 or 2, but I have to bring up at least 3 of this.
Sure.
The first was you grew up in a tough neighborhood, so much so that you felt compelled to bring a gun to school. This was, I guess, between 12 to 15. That was one. The next, I think you were in a gang. There was a bit of a gang fight, and the opposition gang were all armed with machetes.
Yeah.
And so much so that some of it was even knife point at your throat. You thought you were gonna die. And I think something happened. You did a little prayer. The police car went whew, whew, and then they started fleeing. That's 2. The last one is, in the early days, you were working in a suit store. And
right.
I read that you were actually, laundering these Armani suits just to be able to make money. And you got caught. All the evidence were against you. You were supposed to, go to juvie. But the policeman decided to give you a break, right? These are just amazing, incredible stories, right? How does going through all of this kind of hardship below the years of 20, how does it shape who you are today?
First of all, that's great research. Again, I'm not the smartest man in the room. There's always, I always just read these books and I hear these podcasts and quotes, but it was like something like most successful entrepreneurs were troublemakers, not good at school. That was 100% me, right? I sucked at math. I still suck at math. I sucked at English. Still talking, I don't know, whatever language you call it, rap language. But I think that going through hard times and challenges, but having to figure out how to overcome them, whether you have to maneuver, whether you have to just figure it out, survive. And so I think, there's book smart and there's street smart, right? And so I definitely am not book smart. That's so funny. When I graduated high school, my mom and my sisters were crying because they didn't believe I was going to graduate high school. And then when I graduated undergrad, when I graduated summa cum laude, actually, I did a triple degree, triple major. They were just literally bawling and crying again because they was like, oh, I cannot believe my son graduate college. My mom was just happy I didn't go to jail, right? So it was just like amazing, right? So, I'm like the complete opposite of your normal Asian, right? That goes to Harvard or Stanford. That was like my sisters, right? My sisters went to Ivy League and Berkeley and became doctors. I was the complete opposite. I was just like a troubled child. But again, I think having to think in the moment, like there's a dude with a machete up to my throat. How am I going to survive? I just got caught grand theft for stealing 6 figures worth of Armani and Valentino suits. How the F am I going to get out of this? This dude just came out of his house with a shotgun, Vietnam vet, calling me a gook and a chink and, what do I do, right? So it's just like when you grow up in these environments, especially like in the streets, you have to just figure out how to be smart. How do I get out? How do I maneuver? You have to almost be a chameleon, right? How do I become everything to everyone, right? But at the same time, survive, and not just survive, thrive, right? Actually make lemonades out of lemons, right? And so I think that was always the mentality. And I probably learned it from my dad. My dad is like I said, is a very interesting dude. He's a serial entrepreneur, and he also wears a lot of hats that I can't talk about on a podcast. But I realized when I look back, I'm like, oh wow, like I'm actually kind of like my dad. It's kind of crazy, right? It's like he was a serial entrepreneur, and he could always just figure it out and make something out of nothing. And so I think that was the beauty that translates, right? Now that I'm in business and I'm an entrepreneur and I've started multiple companies, it's like I never take no for an answer, right? There's always a way to figure it out, right? That's always when I talk to my staff. It's like, we can't, I'm like, figure it out. There absolutely is a way, right? And it has to be done by this time, yep. And if you read like Elon Musk's book recently, Musk, right? It's like something crazy, like, he took SpaceX and what was a normal rocket would have cost like $15 or $20 million. He brought it down to like 5, yep. Right? And so it's always about how do you figure it out, make it happen, and never say never.
There was an interesting turning point, I think, early 20s. You went to do Bible studies, you found faith, and you went on this whole journey of 4 to 5 years of being like a pastor. And not many people may know this side of you, but what people see in front, right? And I'll name a few. Like you were, most recently in Tatler, 400 leaders of tomorrow in Asia, named as one of them. In terms of, being quoted by Vanity, you were the top 500 business entertainment leaders in the world. So that puts you at the forefront of Hollywood. That puts you in the forefront of global media. We'll talk a bit about your investments and all that. But you went through this route of finding faith, and 5 years, you said, doing exorcism. How did that happen?
Oh, man. Yeah, this is going to be a long conversation. That's going to be... We can just stay here and finish the podcast here.
I told you there was so much to do, so I was really trying to find...
I just did an exorcism last night, actually.
No way.
Yeah, it was crazy. At Code Steakhouse.
That's another genre of podcast. But I think one thing that stood out is, you always felt like when life painted it to be impossible, there was always a way out. And I think that kind of reinforced your faith and kind of drove you to this path. Like, would you mind sharing, after growing up that this seems like a huge right turn, right? To suddenly, I want to do Bible studies.
Yeah, I mean, I always say faith is spelled R-I-S-K, right? It's risk, right? It's believing in something before you actually experience it, meaning before it happens, right? Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. And so you have to believe it. It's all, it's all this talk around manifestation, I'm gonna manifest, right? All that is faith, right? It's just like, okay, do I see myself successful? Do I see myself a certain way? Do I believe that this deal can happen, right? That I can build whatever it is. So you have to visualize everything first, right? Once you have a crystal clear vision, then you can actually manifest that vision into reality, right? And that's faith, right? When it comes to faith, as far as spirituality, I was very blessed. After I became a follower of Christ, I was 17, just turned 17, 18, senior year in high school. And I remember when I walked out the courtroom and the judge literally said, "You're free," even though I was guilty AF, right? I mean, I pleaded guilty. I said I'm guilty. And they literally said, "We understand, but you're not guilty." Like, no, that doesn't compute. But I walked out without a record, without a conviction, without having to go to jail. And I literally just said, "God, you're the nicest dude I ever met in my life. And I'm just going to get out the driver's seat. I'm going to get in the passenger seat. And Jesus, you take the driver wheel and take my life wherever you want to go." And I always say that to see God in everything makes life the greatest adventure. Like, I don't think this is by accident. I don't think anything happens by happenstance. Sure, if I brush my teeth, it's just brushing your teeth. But I do think like the relationships, the people you encounter, the work that you do, if you see God in it, there's intention, and that intention is divine, right? And so for me, this is actually a story. I don't know if I ever told this one. This is a crazy one.
Already.
So my mom was like chronically suicidal and depressed, like chronically. And so growing up, she was just always guilt-ridden, crying, depressed, and that was probably the thing that weighed heaviest on my shoulders and on my mind growing up, to see my mom suffer, seeing her fight with my dad, or just just trying to struggle and make it through. And all of a sudden one day she came home and she was like smiling, she was like glowing, and she was like literally physically glowing, and she was like just like super happy. I'm like, "Yo, Mom, what up? Like, what happened? Like, you're on drugs? Like, what's going on?" Right? And she's like, "I go to this church, it's amazing, blah, 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 blah." And, so I'm like, "What church?" And she's like, "They teach us how to wait on God. And we just feel God's presence in this little Taiwanese church." It was in Milpitas, California, this little city outside San Jose. And it was like this little Taiwanese female pastor. Her name was Pastor Grace. It's called Zion Church of Praise, I remember. And she's like, "You come to my church, you change." And I'm like, "All right, Mom, whatever." But I would just see my mom just like for like a few weeks now, like, wow, she's like literally not crying. She's not suicidal. She's not just like in her own little hole, her own little cave. So I was like, you know what? I think I'm gonna go check this out. So I went with my mom to this little church, and it was, I remember, Sunday morning. But before the church service, normally when you go to a church service, like, you go to New Creation Singapore, Pastor Prince, and it's like 10,000 people. It's like a full-blown rock concert, right? It's like Jesus Coldplay, right? And then this, pastor comes out, he's a rock star pastor, and it's a whole production. This church was like complete opposite. It was like this little rundown, old church building with just like, those church pews. And there was maybe like 15, 20 people there. And they would, every service, before the service, they would spend 1 hour in silence before the service started. And the church congregants would just come and just sit there or kneel and just wait on God, right? And I was like, this is weird. If you study church history, Protestant history, there was they were called Quakers, right? In the early days of the forming of the United States of America, but they were known to quake. And what that meant was they would wait until God's presence would come and shake the room, like shake these people. That's why they were called Quakers, right? God's presence would be so thick. So I remember walking in, I just see like, and they're all speaking Mandarin, right? So this random dude, right? He's just like kneeling, just like, 主耶稣我爱你, like, Jesus, I love you, right? That's like this dude, right? And it sounds like a girl, right? And I'm kind of like, oh, that's weird. And other people just be like crying, like weeping, right? And they'd just be like this. And I'm like, okay, this is wild. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to sit down and join them, right? So I just literally just sat down and I just like, and I kid you not, I don't know what happened. Like literally 2 hours went by. I had an outer body experience. I literally came out of my body and I started traveling back into like the time of Christ. I know it sounds crazy. And I literally see Jesus hanging on the cross, like head to toe bleeding. But I knew it was for the world, but I knew it was like for me. And then I know it sounds crazy, but I literally felt like his blood pouring over my body, but it felt like liquid, perfect love. Like, it was just like, I don't know how to explain it. It was just like, literally I was being washed in the love of God. And it was just like, out of my mind, right? I never felt so high. Like there's no MDMA, no ecstasy, there's no weed, there's no cocaine, there's like no acid, there's nothing that would make you feel like I literally went to outer space and back, right? I was just like, this is like, I'm done. Maybe I'm in heaven. Like it's over. Like I made it. Yeah. Like I made it. It's great. God is great. Life is great. When I came back into my body, the entire church service was done.
No way.
And I don't remember it. It was just literally gone. And my mom was waiting in the car in the parking lot because I was the only one left there. Like 2.5, I don't even know how many hours had just gone by.
No
like
way.
Time just disappeared. And I still remember I was like, what is going on? I was like, out of my mind. I didn't know what to think. I was just like glowing. I felt like I was floating. And then I found my mom waiting in the car there. And it's my classic mom with her Canto accent. She just looks at me. She goes, I tell you, you changed. And I'm like, Mom, what happened? I don't know. I'm so happy. And then so she gave me these tapes. And this is when they had cassette tapes. This is even before CDs, right? And she was like, it was a cassette tape. It's called Waiting on the Lord, Waiting Upon the Lord. And it was 7 tapes taught by this Taiwanese pastor lady, Pastor Grace, on how to wait on the Lord, how to wait on God, how to basically spend time in solitude and silence in solo, intimate devotion, one-on-one with God without saying words. And it was based on a scripture, Isaiah 40:31. Those who wait upon the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles, run and not grow weary, walk and not be faint. And I explained this to my friends who are, I have a lot of friends that believe in all kinds of stuff. People believe in crystals, people worship trees, I don't know, some people worship cups, whatever it is, right? Everyone worships something, right? And I live in LA, so everyone's spiritual. Okay. Everyone's in yoga, everyone's in some, ayahuasca retreat, everyone's like, experiencing their Burning Man or whatever, right? It's all good. And so like, I always tell people that we're made up of 3 parts. We're triune beings. We're body, we're soul, and we're spirit. Your body's your flesh, right? This is, what I eat food with, right? So that's Maslow's hierarchy, right? You just need the basic necessities, right? To eat, to sleep, to have a roof over your head. But your soul is your mind, your will, and your emotions. This is what makes up your personality, right? This is who you are, right? This is Elston, this is Jason, right? And I think most human beings live in the soul level. right? Every day we're just receiving information into our mind. We're making decisions with our will, and we're feeling, right? Whether it's, in our relationships with our family, our friends, or our loved ones, or our significant others, or people we work with. And you go through the ups and downs of happiness and anger and frustration, all these different things. That's all on the soul level. But the third part of us is your spirit, which is what lives on forever. That's what communes with God, with the higher power. And most people don't feed their spirit. We feed ourselves with cupcakes. We feed ourselves with Korean barbecue, bakute, whatever it is. Every day. I had bakute last night. I have it every night. Every night after club, I go to bakute. Ballester. Fantastic. So we normally just feed ourselves 3 meals a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, maybe a little more. And then we're feeding our soul. Most of the time today with social media, most of the time on our phones, right? Yep. 90%. But how much time do we actually spend feeding our spirit, right? Very, very little. For most people, maybe they go to church once a week for 1 hour, sing a few songs, hear a sermon, walk out, and that's their spiritual food. So can you imagine if you flip the script? And that's why fasting is very powerful, right? I'm not going to eat food. I'm going to spend that time, instead of eating physical food, to actually have spiritual food, right? To pray, to meditate. What I'm trying to get at here is, if you actually spend time investing in your spirit, you become a lot more aware, and you become a lot more sensitive, and you become a lot more connected and a lot more strong in your spirit, the same way you would invest in your body, the same way you would invest in your mind, right? So you can invest in your mind going to school. You can invest in your mind studying books. You can invest in your body lifting weights, eating the right food. But you can also invest in your spirit, right? By prayer, by acts of service, by meditation. So my point with all this was, this teacher would ask, I'd listen to these tapes, and it was pretty much like the same teaching every single tape, right? And it was like, waiting upon the Lord, tape number 1. Sit down, be quiet. Turn off all noise and just focus on the Lord. Imagine how beautiful He is. What do you see? And in my head, I'm like, darkness. It's like, do you see Jesus? Isn't He beauty? And then so I would just like, every day, I remember it was like for 5, 6, 7 days, and every day I would just fall asleep because I would just wait for like an hour or two, but then I couldn't, like, I was always thinking about 1,000 other things, right? But it finally got to like day 5 or 6, I remember, I was just adamant. Whatever I experienced at that church, I want to experience it in my room. And so around, I think the 5th or 6th time I was doing this, and around the 1.5 to 2 hour mark, I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden, my hunger dissipated, my mind and my will and my emotion, my distractions, all my thoughts in my head were submitted to my spirit, meaning they just calmed down and they were silenced. And I would kind of just focus my mind on who this Jesus is, right? This God man. And all of a sudden, same thing that happened in the church. Whew, boom, I was gone. And I just like came out of my body, and I was just like in another dimension. I was in the 4th dimension. And again, I started feeling God's presence, His light, His power. It would literally feel like physical electricity, like just full blown, just start blasting through my body, right? And again, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. And this would start continuing on for months, where every day I got so addicted to the presence of God that I would just wait on God every day, because I was like, forget school, forget girls, forget everything on planet Earth. All I want is God, right? And I would just literally come home from, like, I somehow ended up at a state university. I don't even know how, right? I didn't care about my homework. I didn't care about anything. I was just like, I want to feel that again. I want to feel God's presence. I want to experience God's glory. And so every day, 2, 4, 6 hours, I would just be out of my mind, out of body.
Man.
And I would just experience the manifest presence of God. So my spiritual mission is to make known the manifest presence of God to my generation. That's been my mission statement since I was 19 when I experienced this, because I was like, there's nothing better than experiencing God. Like, what else is there in life than to know God? And so for me, that was like the best drug, best anything, was just to be with God. So you're asking me, like, how did I end up like going into the ministry and all that? I mean, there's multiple crazy stories of how all that happened, but long story short was just a bunch of crazy stuff would start happening. like I would just like walk into a room and people start crying. I don't even know why, right? Like I would like literally just start like having dinner with a friend. It was in high school. I remember his name was Aaron, and he would just start manifesting demons, right? And he would just start convulsing. I'm like, yo, bro, whoa, what's going on? And I would literally just have to figure out how to pray for him and pray this demon would come out of him. And I did, I exercised him. And then I remember when I dropped him off, he was like, I remember I drove him back to his house and he was like, I don't want to leave the car. I'm like, bro, you like me? I was kind of, no, he was like, no. And he literally said, I remember him saying this to me. He was like, when I'm with you, my negative thoughts are not there. But I know when I leave this car, they're going to come back.
No way. Wow.
And I was like, bro, like, yo, that's crazy, right? Yeah. And I'm not even saying like I'm special. It was just like, I think I was just like so juiced up with God's energy, God's presence. I was like a battery, right? It was just like every day I'm like gonna get recharged, right? And then that energy would go out and I gotta get recharged again, right? So I just started seeing a lot of weird, wild, supernatural stuff started happening around me. People started asking me to like cast out devils out of people, and then people started asking me to like pray for them to get healed, and people get healed. And then, you know, I started getting prophetic thoughts. Like I didn't know what prophecy was at the time. I just started having premonitions of like who you are before I even know you. I just somehow know your past, your present, and your future, like stuff like that.
I read about all this. That's why I said like I knew an hour is not sufficient. And man, how do we continue topping a story of this? But I wanted to give perspective, right? When you mention all this is a very real feeling, because in your younger childhood, you've actually experienced near death, you've experienced fear, hunger. So your emotional bandwidth from an organic perspective, you have went through the whole 10 miles. And in your early years, you also were, dealing drugs. So in terms of enhancements, you also knew the full spectrum of that. But what you're saying right now is whatever you felt before that, whether organic or enhanced, this topped all of it. So I wanted to give perspective that this was just not you, just making this up or like this is how I feel, but you've actually known the full spectrum of what's humanly possible, and you realize that, man, there is something else above that. You mentioned about the body, the spirit, and in how you finding Christ kind of led you to this milestone mindset shift, right? There was another of this very important milestone in your life. You met this world-renowned Grammy artist, MC Hammer. Can touch this.
That's right.
Like this is
iconic.
This is iconic, right? And the story was that you were trying to like find what you want to do work in, and you were hustling your butt off to kind of get a message to him for like 6 months, and you relentlessly tried,
right,
until he finally gave in, and he was asking, hey, what you doing? You didn't have a good answer for him, and he said, why don't you come work for me, right?
Yeah.
Tell me about this experience. How was it like working with him? What change did it do to you? And I even saw videos of you when he brought you to deals when YouTube and the Steve co-founders were 5 people at YouTube, early days of Jack Dorsey of Twitter. And I saw you talking to news reporters, showing them about Twitter back in like 2007, 2008.
Yeah.
Like, what was this next milestone chapter for you? How was that like?
That's a great question. I'm very indebted and appreciative of Hammer's influence in my life and his mentorship. I call him my black dad. I also call him pastor, because he's actually an ordained minister. He was actually an ordained minister before he became MC Hammer. So you can actually watch. There was a VH1 movie 20 years back, but he was literally training to become a preacher, a Holy Ghost preacher, and he actually started the first Holy Ghost rap group. It's called the Holy Ghost Boys in Oakland. And then it was when he was in Bible seminary that his wife told him, hey, you shouldn't waste this gift that God's given you to dance. You should go hammer time. I don't know if she regretted it. but long story short, that's how he transitioned. He went from being in the ministry to then becoming one of the most iconic hip-hop legends of all time. But I'll sum it up with this. When I was 7, I've shared this before, my dad asked me what I want to be when I grow up. And he said this to me in Canton. He's like, journalist on Somaya. Like, what do you want to be? So as a 7-year-old, I like drawing. So I took out a piece of paper and I took out some crayons and I drew 3 pictures of myself. And one was me in a suit and a tie holding a suitcase. The second was me with a French Pierre cap and a paintbrush and a paint palette. And the third was me behind a church pulpit with a crucifix behind me preaching. Whoa. And so my dad was like, what is this? Amuse me. And I was like, well, Dad, Monday through Friday, I want to be a businessman like you. Saturday, I want to be an artist. And Sunday, I want to be a preacher. And he was like, Sengmoktai, smart aleck, right? He was like, all right. Would I've ever thought, 25 years later, 30 years later, 40 years later, that God would have given me the opportunity and the blessing to experience each of those 3 exact pictures that I drew of myself, right? But why I always say that, you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. It just never happens the way you think it's going to happen. But if you really have intention and you see God in everything, nothing's by accident. And that's where MC Hammer comes into my life, right? How could a Asian American wannabe thug that was stealing suits, right, and just causing ruckus in the streets from nothing and no one and no pedigree and poverty meet MC Hammer, who also happens to be a entrepreneur, an artist, and a preacher? I mean, it was a divine setup, right? And so he literally taught me startups, venture capital, media. I mean, I remember he brought me, it was called Fry's Electronics. I think they still have Fry's Electronics, an electronics store in the California. And he's like, we're going to go build our own independent music label, and you're going to write the business plan.
Wow.
I'm 17 years old or 18 years old. I remember I just graduated high school, and I'm like, I barely graduated high school. Okay, I can barely read. And he's like, takes me to Fry's, and he buys a CD. I remember it was a box with a CD-ROM on how to write a business plan. So he was like, put this in your computer, follow the instructions, and if you don't understand, ask me questions. And I was like, word? So literally, I remember, like, it took me like 2 weeks, but I literally wrote like a 70-something page business plan for our own independent music label. And that's where Hammer taught me about payola. And he taught me about Radio 1, Clear Channel, and this is how it works with the DJs, and this is how you get them to play your songs, and this is how much money it costs to market a track and a single in 1999, right? It was $2 million, right, to market, right? And so we raised millions of dollars off of that 75-page CD-ROM business plan when I never went to B school. I never had a master's, right, at that time, right? But again, just figuring it out, make it happen, just do it, right? And so he taught me the music industry. Then he taught me, we were at YouTube when it was 5 people. He was like, Jason, tonight there's a company called YouTube. They're uploading content to servers. San Mateo, blah, blah, blah. Drive me there. I drove him there. He went straight up. It was about Pizza Parlor, and it was Chad Hurley, Steve Chen, and Twitter, Salesforce when it was like less than 100 people. I mean, every single major tech startup that rules your phone today with apps, we were there. Dropbox, Square, Airbnb, Uber,
TikTok.
right? even TikTok. That was later. But, Hammer was best friends with a guy named Ron Conway, who's the godfather of Silicon Valley, SV Angels, right? He was the investor that defined and termed that terminology, angel investment, came from Ron Conway. First checks in eBay, Google, Twitter, all these different companies. And so I could have never had planned that I would have a mentor that would teach me entrepreneurship. On the weekends, I would literally be there with him performing at the halftime show for the Golden State Warriors or the Oakland A's, right? Or the Detroit Pistons, wherever he was that weekend, literally doing full-blown entertainment tours and shows. And I then saw what it was like to be an artist. But then literally on Sunday or weekdays, he would take me to prison cells and we would do full-blown deliverance exorcism ministry with inmates. Okay. You just can't make it up. You just can't make it up, right? And so literally everything I learned and everything I knew, it was osmosis. I just watched Hammer do it, right? And then he would just have me do it, right? And it was funny because I also learned, like, there's only two people in the world that make you wait, like, hours to meet them. Number one is presidents. Number two, rappers. Okay. so I would have meetings, he would set me up with some CEO chairman from Korea, some guy from SoftBank, some like all these billionaires and, VCs and founders and they would all, come to meet MC Hammer, right? I mean, this is the Bay Area. You gotta understand, like, MC Hammer's the only celebrity in the Bay Area at the time, right? This is before anything else, right? And he was the first celebrity investing in tech startups, right? Before anyone else, right? I still remember when he brought Ashton Kutcher to Twitter when he was still with Demi Moore at the time, and then he brought will.i.am, and then it became this whole, every NBA player is a VC now, and every, but I just remember, like, wow, I'm just so blessed, right, to be able to be mentored and to have this history and this experience by watching him. And I go back to, he would set me up with these meetings and he'd be 2 hours late all the time, sometimes 4 hours late. Sometimes he just doesn't even show up because he's MC Hammer. So they'd be like, oh, where's Hammer? Like, I remember this Korean CEO, he was an animation company that we invested in. And he was like, he's 4 hours. I'm like, I'm so sorry. It's Hammer time. It's like, it's literally Hammer time. Right? Yeah, and then he'd come strolling in with his sunglasses, 4 hours late, and just like it was 4 minutes, right? And everyone would be happy to meet him, right? But so I had to learn how to talk to entrepreneurs, ask them questions, and smart questions, right? And so again, it's just like you don't learn this at Harvard, right? You just got to figure it out. You just have to learn how to talk to people, right? So going back to, like, when I was young, I had to learn how to talk to anyone, right? Selling candy, selling drugs, selling whatever I was selling, right? And so I think it was all kind of just preparation. We're now in business, talking is, for most people, there's two greatest fears, right? It's the fear of death and the fear of public speaking, right? And it's so funny. I was with my friend Siwon Choi. Choi Siwon is, the best looking Korean man from Super Junior. We're old buddies for almost 20 years. And he was speaking at Milken this year, right? Yep. And I bumped into him yesterday at the hotel, and he's like, "Oh, Jason." I was like, "Yo, Siwon." He's like, "Bro, I was so nervous speaking at Milken." And I'm like, "You're a K-pop star. Like, shouldn't this be easy in your sleep?" But it's very different performing a dance or performing a song and, like, being in front of a crowd and speaking, right? Because I think most people just don't want to sound stupid, right? So there's this fear of, like, what if I look dumb, right? Or I say the wrong thing, right? Anyways, my point here is just, like, having grown up and learning to talk to anyone and figure out any environment, any situation with anyone at any time in any place. It's not even about fear. I think fear is just about what you don't understand, right? When you don't understand something, you fear it, right? But if you've experienced it 10,000 times, right? That's what we talk about outliers, right? That Malcolm Gladwell concept that if you spend 10,000 hours doing anything, you can become a master, right? And so for me, it was the gift of gab. Like I spent 10,000 plus, maybe 100,000, a million hours of my life talking, preaching, speaking, selling, convincing, figuring it out, right, at all times. And so that was a blessing.
And this is where the story gets crazier. I mean, I have the benefit of looking about your life in the doc, right? But this is what I mean by it gets crazier. You were used to, like you said, preaching, saying the word of God. At the back, you were also like, in your words, like a wannabe rapper. You wanted to make a move in the movie scene. So there was that, the preacher part of Jaeson, there was the rapper part of Jaeson. And after that, it led you towards, creating some of the largest media companies in the world with 88 Rising, Joji, some of the largest brands and personalities in the company. But there was this point where you found a way to put everything together, either by chance or by yourself, where you launched your first single called Love. And at that time, this was a very unique voice. I might be able to listen to it. You were giving a sermon, you were preaching over a beat.
Right.
And what was interesting was when on that record, you managed to get someone to sing on that track for $1,500 for 4 tracks.
So the check stub.
That was Bruno Mars.
Yeah.
How? Like, I don't even understand.
I mean, with time left, we could tell that story. I had invested into my first company. It was an Asian American music management company. So they managed hip hop artists that were Asian American. One was Far East Movement. Another artist was Jin, the battle rapper, MC Jin. And so when I met them, they were honestly broke and they had no hits, nothing was going on. But there's a crazy story. There's a whole crazy story there. But long story short, I baptized Kev Nish, the manager guy, and Jin all in the bathtub on the same day. And I said, God's going to start Asian Def Jam. and I raised pretty much almost $1 million and I invested into the company. But part of it was Kev Nish from Far East Movement, the leader of Far East Movement, was going to produce my album, right? And I was, like you said, kind of like a wannabe Christian gospel rapper. Actually, I'll tell this. I haven't told this one part of the story. It's like kind of wild. And so in high school, I made my first mixtape, and it was a tape. And on the A side, it was me doing like battle raps, like straight up Eminem 8 Mile style, like conscious hip hop. On the B side, it was a bunch of Asian joke raps, right? So I had like a song called What the Pho, about pho noodles. I had a song called Asian Girl. I had a song called Enter the Dragon Wagon. It was like me prank calling Vietnamese pho restaurants, like, can I get pho Kim Long? If pho, is this pho you? Do you have Ice Cube in your pho pho you? Anyways, I was like, it was like hilarious. And then my second album, how it happened was, after I did mission work, I decided I was not going to touch music because I was like, music's the devil, like entertainment, media's the devil. I'm just going to go do God's work. But I burned out in my mission work, and I ended up going to like this Christian rehab center where I was like learning about God all over again. And when I was there, I had this Christian mentor, and I had 5 dreams 5 nights in a row, and they were like pretty much the same exact dream, but with a different rap icon in the dream. And so I remember, like, the first night was Dr. Dre. The second night was actually Diddy, God bless. Oh, God, right? Lord have mercy, man. Third night was Will Smith. Fourth night was Hammer. And then fifth night was Eminem. And they all basically came up to me and said, well, I want to sign you as a gospel rapper. I'm going to sign you as a gospel rapper. And I'm like, okay, so you have 1 dream, whatever. 2 dreams, you're kind of like, that's weird. 3 dreams, you're already like, okay. I mean, 5 dreams, 5 nights in a row, right? So it's like, obviously, like, the man upstairs is trying to say something to me. So I went back to this mentor guy, and I was like, what do you think these dreams mean? He goes, well, I don't know. It sounds like God wants you to be a Christian rapper. I'm like, but I thought I'm not supposed to do that. Like, I'm not supposed to, do music industry. He's like the devil and da da da. He's like, maybe it's God saying you passed a test. Go back to LA and just sort of go try making some music. So I found this worship leader at this church, this Asian American church. His name is Mike Wang. And he was making tracks on Cubase, which is like a music program that comes with your MacBook. And he was a worship leader, right? And this is a time when like Linkin Park and like Limp Bizkit and like Evanescence, it was like that era, right? It was like rock rap. And so he was really good. He was really anointed. So he played guitar, and then we would just make like hip hop beats, and then I would just do my little Christian rap right over it. And it was like Christian Linkin Park. It was like a whole thing, right? It was called Namesake. And then I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do with this. I had this CD. I like made it out of my trunk, and I like printed like 1,000 of them. I'm like, what am I gonna do with this CD, right? I don't know. I don't know anyone. I don't know who am I gonna give it to, right? I actually let Hammer hear it, and he was kind of like, he was like, son, keep working on your raps. And I was like, all right, damn it. And I remember I went to this Christian retreat in Kansas City, and literally I remember it was called the International House of Prayer, and they have challenges as well. But at the time, they had this children's prophetic ministry where they would teach kids, like 10-year-old, 12-year-old, 8-year-old kids to prophesy, read your mail. And during a session, this pastor dude came out with like 6, 7 kids. It was like straight out of the movie, like Matrix, when he goes into that house with all the kids are bending spoons. It was like that. Yeah. And literally this kid looks at me and he says, "You're a musician." And I'm like, no, I'm not. And my assistant was with me. He was like, tell him about your rap album. And then so he goes, "I have a word for you." This kid's like 9, 10 years old. So he goes into a room, gets a piece of paper and crayons, and he comes back out, and it's a picture that he drew of a flaming sword. Remember, it was orange and red, fire around it, but it was like a silver sword, like a knife, but it had a musical note in the middle of the sword. And this kid's like 9, 10 years old. He looks at me. He's like, "God wants me to tell you that he's changing and transitioning you in your calling from being a missionary to being a musician. And when the words that come out of your mouth land into the music, it's going to turn the hearts of a generation to repent and come back to God." And I'm like, "Yo, bro, you're only 9. Chill." Right? And I literally was like so shocked. I literally grabbed my phone, called my buddy in LA that was my rap partner. Like, "Mike, yo, I don't know. I think we should up our software to Pro Tools." And so kid you not, that CD somehow got into the hands of this former triad boss. I was running all the Asian nightclubs. I was managing Far East Movement and managing Gen. And then somehow, that's a whole nother story, how I met him, and then blah, blah, blah. And then so when Nish from Far East Movement was like producing my album, I remember we had this like intervention. We're like in the office. I remember it was him and this guy named James Pro from another member of Far East Movement. He's like, "Yo, Jay, we really love you, we respect you, and but we're listening to your album, and we're supposed to produce it, but your rap is like," basically we're like, it's like mediocre. They're like, "You're not Jay-Z, you're not Black, you're not Eminem, you're not like a hot looking white dude that can rap. You're not Cypress Hills. Like, we're not sure what to do with you." But it's like, you know what? But man, we thought about it, Jay. Like, when you pray for us and you preach, man, it's powerful. And he was like, you ever thought about just like praying over the beat or like preaching over the beat? And I kid you not. The night before this intervention, like they're trying to like not make me a rapper, right? Like steer me away. There was this guy named Charles he was the main keyboardist for a lot of famous artists like Jewel and Raphael Sadiq, I think Beyonce as well. And he was our church worship leader at the church I went to. And he literally made a beat and he sent it to me. And he said, "Jason, God told me to send you this beat." Man. And it was the beat for the song Love. And it was just like it was a dope ass beat. It was just dope, right? And so I played it for Kev, and he was like, "Oh, that beat's dope." He's like, "You know what? Why don't you have any of your sermons on YouTube?" And I was like, "Yeah, there's a few." He's like, "Why don't you play one of your sermons on YouTube over that beat and just see what happens?" And I was like preach over the beat? He's like, "Yeah." I was like, "All right." So I play the beat, and then I turn on my laptop and I play one of my sermons, and it lands in this like crazy cadence. And it's just like, I'm preaching, but it's like a hip hop beat. And then all of a sudden Kev's like, "Yo, this is crazy." He was like, "Yo, this is crazy." He's like, you're like Joel Osteen and Eminem, like smashed into one. And he's like, "Can you just preach?" I was like, "Yeah, dude, I've been doing this for like 5 years, like every day for like the last 5 years of my life, 10,000 hours. So I literally went into the studio the next day and I freestyled that entire song, Love.
That's crazy.
So 3 verses, 16 bars. Literally, he was just like, "All right, just talk about love." He's like, "Just preach about love." And so I was like, "Now Hollywood wants to make you think they know what love is, but I'm gonna tell you what love is." Blah, blah, blah. I just kept going on, and it would just land somehow perfectly 16 bars, right? 3 verses. And he's like, "This is crazy." He's like, "You're Asian Eminem."
And I can actually hear the influences. Like,
Yeah, but he was like, and then he was like, "Yo, but this is like too religious. It's like you're preaching. Like we got to get someone to sing on the hook to make it more radio friendly, make it more pop." Right? I'm like, "Okay, word." Like who, what? I don't got so much of a budget. And he was like, "Oh, I got this guy. He's a Filipino brother, and you know he writes for us all the time, and I'm pretty sure he needs some money. I think I can get a package deal for you." And I was like, "All right." Well, I was like, "What's his name?" He's like, "Check out his MySpace." This is MySpace.com at the time. He's like, "Bruno Mars." I was like, "Who's Bruno Mars?" He's like, "Just look it up." So MySpace.com, Bruno Mars, and I'm listening to his songs. I'm like, "Oh." I'm like, "Dude, he sounds like Michael Jackson." He's like, "Yeah,
He does.
he sounds like Michael Jackson." I was like, "Call him up." So he calls up Bruno, and he hangs up the phone with me. He's like, "Jay, I got you the package deal. He's gonna write and record for you next weekend 4 tracks for $1,500, $1,500 US." I was like, "Word?" I was like, "Done. Where do I sign?" So I literally wrote the check, Wells Fargo, $1,500, Bruno Mars. And next weekend, he laced 4 tracks for me, one session. Laced 4 tracks, wrote it, sang it, recorded it. And it was so good. I was like, why do I need to get someone else to, because he's a ghost writer, right? I was like, just keep him on the track. And so the first single was Love, and we released it on, this is before Spotify, there was Amazon Music. So we released it on Amazon. I remember Twitter had just come out, and it hits top 10 gospel charts. Boom. And it starts getting millions of views on YouTube. And then literally about 6 months later, Forest Movement record Like a G6 in the basement.
Yep.
Goes number 1 for like however many months it went. 15 million records. Jin, you know, we sent to Hong Kong for Universal, 1 record deal. And then he becomes like Will Smith of China now. Like MC Jin, right? And then of course Bruno. I think within that year he got signed to Atlantic.
Man, and I think I even have more stories to talk about. I know we don't have time for that, but like I even read about how you were part of this whole craze of Linsanity, right? Jeremy Lin in the US. You were involved with Higher Brothers, man. Like that was when my first interaction of Chinese rap came about. And this whole crazy story of, you know, Caravan, another company that you've launched. And of course with Open, most recently, I think in total you raised like almost like $40. You were one of the early investors in Grab, in Musical.ly. There's all this, you know, success to unpack, right? But I wanted to end the show with 2 questions, and I told myself I have to ask these 2 questions before we wrap up. The first question is, how much of all of your success do you attribute to a higher being or to yourself? And the reason I ask this is because you said about manifestation, but at its root is perseverance, at its root is self-belief, it's confidence. You know, you talked about having 5 dreams. Could it also be because you were just really passionate about the problem, and as you were writing, you're thinking about it, it came up in your dreams? Like, how much of it do you think it's you? How much of it do you think it's something else?
There's a quote that I love. Again, I forgot where I found this quote. Maybe I made it up. I have no idea. But I say, pray like it all depends on God, walk like it all depends on you. So there's a spiritual reality, there's also a soul or human reality, right? God doesn't reward laziness, okay? You don't become LeBron James or Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan because God just blessed you, okay? You just woke up one day and you just was a GOAT, right? No, there's a Mamba mentality, right? Was Kobe a Christian? Did he believe in God? Did he give thanks to God? Yes. He had a Bible verse tatted on his shoulder, right? Steph Curry, right? On every one of his shoes, Philippians 4, right? I can do all things through Christ Jesus who strengthens me. But did Steph Curry, Kobe, MJ, all the greats spend not just the hard work and the hard time, but they were willing to go the distance and do what other players were not willing to do. So you can never have greatness without sacrifice. You can never have impact without investing your time, your blood, your sweat, your energy in perfecting and mastering a craft, right? And that's a God-given gift. So there's a Linkin Park song that came to my head. You know, it's 1%, it's, 90% basically perseverance, hard work, 10% luck, yep. Right? And so shout out to Mike Shinoda. But that's what it is. So I think there is an element of divinity, or whether you want to call it luck or providence or happenstance or chance. I just met MC Hammer, right? So I'll attribute those divine connections or strategic connections, relationships, opportunities, open doors, closed doors. Sometimes your no is your greatest yes. You think your company falling apart, or this girl that dumped you, or the school that rejected you, you didn't go to Harvard, was, a huge failure. But that was actually God's plan to set you up for success, because he didn't want Steph Curry at Duke. He wanted him at Davidson. You know what I'm saying? And so, again, do everything that you can possibly do to be the best at whatever you're called to do. Whether it's a podcast, whether it's, cleaning the streets, whether it's being a librarian, being an athlete, being an engineer, being a doctor, lawyer, being a whatever it is that you love, making flowers, like be the best at what you love and are called to do. Make no excuses. Don't look to your left. Don't look to your right. Use competition as inspiration, but only compete with yourself and be the best version of yourself, right? And no excuses, right? Probably one of my biggest pet peeves is just lazy people, right? Lazy people that blame, oh, why didn't God do this? It's not that why didn't God do this, it's why didn't you do what God created you to do, right? Don't blame it on God, right? Blame it on yourself, right? And what you can't do, what's out of your hands, that's God, right? Kobe went to the championship, 10 times. Came away with, 5 rings, right? But he lost another 5 championships. Yeah. But he showed up. He was Kobe. So the outcome, you can't predict. So I go, let go and let God, right? Work hard and trust God. Do your part, God will do his part, right? But have an attitude of gratitude, have an attitude of faith, have a mindset of success, because God didn't create us to lose. He created us to win, right? I recently just helped produce this Kanye show in Korea, and I just love being around Kanye because Ye's just Ye, The stuff that comes out of his mouth is so amazing. He's like, it's true. I'm bigger than Apple. You might think that sounds crazy, but you know what? When he speaks things like that into existence, that he can be the president of the United States, that he can be bigger than Apple, bigger than Amazon. That's how he is who he is. That's how he can sell out stadiums of 40, 50,000 and perform for 3.5 hours, right? Because he has this mindset that I truly believe is a God mindset, meaning, I'm not saying all the other stuff that he has issues with, but he has this thinking where anything is possible. Not just anything is possible, I'm great. But there's a big difference between being cocky and being proud in a selfish and insecure way. But then there's also a cocky and being proud that is actually a God way. And I think people like Kobe, MJ, the greats, Muhammad Ali, I'm just naming some athletes, right?
Yeah.
But Steve Jobs, right? They had a cockiness because they had the authority to have that cockiness, right? Because I've worked harder, because I put in the time, because I know what I'm talking about, versus someone else that's just trying to show that they're rich or show that they're successful just because they want to get chicks or, you know, they feel insecure that they're not whatever, right? That's a different kind of cockiness. That's a different kind of proud that God hates, right? Is falsity, pretend, right? But when you can be cocky, when you can be proud, because it's a God-given gift, then that is the highest level of manifestation. Because now you're just doing you. You're just doing what God put you on earth to do. And that is very powerful when someone is able to reach that level of actualization. That's the goal.
I will be listening to this when I'm in the gym, when I'm in on a run the next time, when I feel like, you know, I'm the lowest of low. I have to end the show with one last question. And it's a tradition that we do. If you look back to the lowest point in your life, you know, I'm going to use the example of maybe when you were feeling lost, you were dealing drugs at home. I remember you said, you made your parents, your mom cry. If you had to go back in time and you only had airtime to say one sentence, right? Condense everything into one sentence to tell young Jason when he was lost, hopeless, didn't know what's ahead of him, what would you go back and say to him?
Never give up. Admit your mistakes, but don't stay there. Move forward. And it'll always work out.
Very short, very simple, but it means so much. Like I said, I wished we had 10 hours to do this show, but I really, really appreciate the candor, the honesty, and even as an interviewer, I feel like I'm at school, right? I take these learnings, and I think these messages will resonate a lot with the audience. Thank you so much, Jason, for coming all the way down here. I really, really enjoyed this.
Thanks for having me, Austin.
Appreciate it.
The tree.
That's right.
The man of steadiness and strength. All right, man. That was awesome. Cheers, bro. Thanks for having me, man. That was fun.
Thank you.
Yeah.